So here are some continued notes on misconceptions students had in bios based on some of the information given in essays and responses to bell ringer questions and some of the work. So I wanted to take time to go through those and get them available to you on Classroom so that you have a chance to get some accurate info into your notebooks before our quiz, which I'm switching to Thursday this week. So many folks had the idea that hypotheses become theories which become laws over time with more and more data. That it's a linear progression, one to the other to the other. And that is a false belief. And I wanted to make sure that we have clear definitions for these three concepts. And so I'm wanting to give you some examples of each too. So hypotheses are framed within an experimental situation where you're comparing two variables, or you're exploring the relationship between two variables and then making a prediction about that relationship. And so it's, if I change one variable, then it will have an impact on another variable. Sometimes it's not used as if-then, but it is always a predictive statement that allows you to identify the experimental variable versus the measurable or dependent variable. So more insect orders will visit purple asters than white asters. So what I'd be changing in this experiment would be the color of the flowers, and I would be measuring how many different types of insects visit them. So that'd be my predictive statement. I'm not explaining why, I'm just saying this is the prediction. That's a hypothesis. A theory, on the other hand, is an explanation of some aspect of the natural world, oftentimes based or backed up by previous data or previous experience. And so, for example, I have spent time out in athletic fields, but I've also spent time out in the ELC. And I've noticed that it seems like there's more insect sounds and more insect types crawling around in the ELC versus out in the athletic fields. And so if I'm trying to come up with an explanation for that, that is a theory. So when you see the word because used to explain why, that is talking about a theory. So theories are often the explanation for the predictions that we make in experiments. Laws are broad generalizations or patterns that we see in nature about some aspect of it. They don't explain, they just describe. Under such conditions, this will happen. So, for example, in biology, there's a universal law that all organisms have to take in matter to stay alive. There's no organism that anyone has ever studied that defies this law, this truth about organisms. Gotta have matter taken in on some regular basis to replenish and access energy and building blocks to help grow, develop, reproduce, repair, so on. So make sure you understand those three concepts. One of the questions on the What is Science asked how easy it is it to change scientific ideas, or do our explanations in science change? Do models of how we understand the world change? And the answer is, of course, yes. Science is designed to be able to change as we get new and better information. So, for example, Earth's place in space, or the model of atoms and how atoms function. Our understanding of cells and heredity have changed drastically over time. The key thing to understand is that when we have a model that we've been working with for a certain amount of time in society and in scientific circles, it's not easy to shift our ideas. We need a fair amount of new evidence that would disprove the old model in support of a new one. And so even though the scientific community might eventually get that evidence and start to claim that new model, that new theory, then they have to share that with the rest of the world. And so the rest of the world, the public, is sometimes even slower to catch on and latch on to new ideas. So instead of the Earth being the center of our solar system, the sun would be it. And that model, the Copernican revolution, you may have heard of it, historically speaking, that change did not happen lightly, easily in society, but it did happen because more and more evidence continued to defy the old model and support the new. So usually it happens slowly and incrementally. You read nature's calendar. From that, I want to have a clear definition of what phenology is all about. Being in Minnesota, we actually have probably more of an experience with this than most people because of the very strong distinctions between our four seasons and how much organisms are affected by the changes of seasons. So we define phenology as studying the cyclical changes in plants and animals in relationship to the changing seasons. I suppose we could just throw in organisms there, not just plants and animals, but those are the ones that most people are interested in. So this picture kind of gives you a clue. You have budding leaves in the spring, barely coming in, the grass is just starting to green up. Then you have the summer green canopy. In the fall, the leaf colors change and lighten up and they fall off eventually, and they're a barren tree in the winter when there's snow. So that's just one phenological event we can pay attention to as fall continues to march on. This is just an example. Those are spring buds on a maple tree. They could become flowers, they could become new branches, they could become leaves. But it looks like in this case they become new flowers. So maples are flowering plants. Again, not a very noticeable flower, but flowering nonetheless. And they produce fruits. So any flowering plant produces a fruit. And this is these little helicopters are the fruit of the maple tree. You probably have seen some of those out in the ELC hanging from the box elder maples. I think there's some out on the west lawn on that maple tree too. But those fruits develop over the summer when the full foliage is out on the tree. It's locking in lots of sugar in its role carrying on photosynthesis. But eventually they take that sugar from those leaves and send it down underground in the roots. So the sap runs away from the leaves, and then those leaves dry up and fall off after they change color. And again, an adaptation to save water. Those deciduous trees are trying to save water by losing their leaves. And then in the winter, no photosynthesis. But winter doesn't last forever, thankfully. So as spring begins to emerge, the snow melts. That sap starts to head up the trunk from the roots to the ends of the branches, where it can then trigger those buds to burst open, form the new flowers and the new leaves and the new branches. So it's when that sap flows in usually March or so where we see maple syruping happening. So maple syruping is a phenological event too. All right, community versus ecosystem. What's the difference? Well, we're going to be exploring that in our next chapter, so let's maybe spend some time defining it now. A community of organisms includes all the living things within a defined area. So if you look at this aquarium, everything alive in there is part of the biological community of that aquarium. So biotic means living. We already wrestled with the notion of biome when we talked about Minnesota's biomes. But the large dominant communities, biological communities, or ecosystems, called biomes. And Minnesota has 3 biggies, which we've already explored. Just hope you remember temperate deciduous forest, coniferous forest and grassland or prairie. An ecosystem includes the community of organisms, but also the things in their environment that affect them, abiotic factors. So this aquarium is full of water, it has dissolved oxygen in it, it has a pH, it has a temperature, it has light given to it. All of those things are abiotic factors that influence the community within. So when you are talking about an ecosystem, you have to include the abiotic factors as well. So an ecosystem is broader than a community. And abiotic just means non-living things. So what determines the community of an area? There's Nye Nature Center. And why do we have deciduous forest here? Because it is the right climate for this area. So climate of an area determines what biome lives there or exists there. When we think of climate, there's a lot to it, but the 2 variables of climate that we pay most attention to and have the most influence on the organisms living there will be the average temperature and the average precipitation. So around here, you could look up what is the average temperature and precipitation necessary for a deciduous forest, and you find out that we here in this area fit in that range. So that's a wrap on those slides. I'm going to spend a little time on some new slides too, but make sure you get these in your notebook.